Sometimes a small act of kindness writes a new destiny, like a poor cleaner helping an old woman in the rain, unaware that she holds the key to his future. An old woman, alone in the rain. Rain has a strange way of revealing truths, the kind people often hide under sunshine. On that particular evening, as the city was blanketed by gray clouds and relentless rain, life seemed to retreat indoors. Streets emptied, shops pulled their shutters down, and people became silhouettes behind fogged-up glass. Cars hurried by, their headlights catching fleeting glimpses of puddles, fallen leaves, and blurred reflections. In such weather, compassion too seemed to vanish with the sunlight. Amid this wet, cold indifference stood an old woman, alone. Not just physically, but in every possible way. Age had weighed her shoulders down, but what pressed heavier was the silence around her, the kind that stings when no one even bothers to ask if you need help. Her soaked clothes clung to her fragile frame, and her silver hair, once possibly proud and neatly tied, now dripped down her face like forgotten strands of memory. The rain showed her vulnerability more than any words ever could. She wasn't in distress in the dramatic way people often expect. She wasn't crying, shouting, or waving for help. She was simply there, silent, still, and entirely overlooked. That's what made the scene so quietly heartbreaking. Her eyes searched, but not desperately. They weren't pleading. They had perhaps given up on that long ago. She looked around more out of habit than hope, as though some part of her still remembered what it felt like to be noticed. People passed, and passed, and passed, umbrellas tilted away from her as if she were an inconvenience in their path. Feet sped up, eyes darted to phones, collars were turned up higher. Everyone seemed to be running from the rain, but no one realized they were also running past a chance to be kind, a chance to be human. This woman didn't belong to the city's pace anymore. She didn't match its urgency, its constant rush, its obsession with being somewhere else. She was a pause in the middle of motion, a reminder, a question. But in a world too busy answering notifications and chasing time, she was just background. And yet, the rain kept falling, indifferent to cruelty, but also cleansing in its own way. Maybe that's why moments like these matter. Because in a world flooded with apathy, sometimes the most powerful image is not a grand rescue, but a quiet presence ignored. This was the canvas before change. A city drowning in self-importance, an old woman fading into the fog, and the question hanging in the air. Would anyone care enough to stop? In the grand theater of the city, some people remain invisible, not because they hide, but because no one looks. Street cleaners, waste pickers, tea vendors, they form the quiet rhythm of daily life, sweeping away the mess others leave behind. No applause, no appreciation. Just tired backs, worn-out shoes, and a resilience that somehow keeps waking up every morning. Among them was a man most wouldn't remember, even if they saw him twice. He had no name in the corridors of power, no degrees, no polished shoes, no curated smile. What he had were hands toughened by labor and a heart untouched by bitterness. He worked silently in the background, cleaning pavements, clearing garbage, moving through the margins of a world that often pretended he wasn't there. He was used to being overlooked. When people walked by him, they didn't see a man. They saw a uniform, or sometimes not even that. They saw inconvenience when his broom blocked the sidewalk, irritation when his trash cart delayed their car. But none of that hardened him. In fact, he had something rare, the capacity to notice what others ignored, not out of obligation, but because he still felt something most had lost: compassion. That evening, as the rain carved rivers along the gutters and cold winds wrapped themselves around every bone, he could have hurried too. His clothes, barely enough to keep the cold out, were soaked through. His shoes had long since stopped keeping water out. His fingers had turned stiff and numb. But something in him, something unteachable, kept his eyes open, not for safety, but for humanity. It was then that he saw her, the old woman others had passed without a glance. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He didn't care who she was or what she had. What he saw was simple. A human being in pain, and for him that was enough. No calculation, no hesitation, just instinct, rooted not in duty, but in decency. He had no umbrella, just a thin plastic sheet tucked under his belt to keep his lunch dry. Without a second thought, he took it out, not because someone was watching, in fact, no one ever watched him, but because his heart told him that a stranger's comfort mattered, even if only for a moment. This wasn't heroism, not the kind that makes headlines. It was something quieter, more powerful, an act born from nothing but the richness of spirit, a wealth that doesn't show in bank accounts or job titles, but in how you treat someone who can do nothing for you in return. In a city where everyone walked faster to avoid the rain, he walked slower, toward it, toward her, toward a decision that would change everything, though he had no idea yet. The truest kindness often comes from those who have the least to give, not because they expect something in return, but because they understand what it means to need. For the cleaner, the act of helping that old woman wasn't a moment of heroism. It wasn't even a decision. It was something his heart did before his mind had time to object. Because when you've lived your life being overlooked, you know how it feels to stand in the rain and wonder if anyone sees you. What stood out wasn't what he did, it was what he didn't do. He didn't ask for her name or why she was there alone. He didn't ask if she had money or a home or family. He didn't lecture her about standing in the rain or scold her like some might do. And most importantly, he didn't ask what she could do for him in return. His help came without conditions, without the need to impress or earn praise. That's what made it rare. In a world where every favor seems tied to a transaction, his kindness stood alone, unwrapped, unbranded, and real. He offered her his scarf, a threadbare thing, not worth anything to most people, but warm from his own neck. He held it out not as charity, but as a simple gesture of care. She hesitated at first, as people who are rarely helped often do, unsure whether to accept, unsure whether she even deserved it. But he smiled softly, and something in that smile told her she was safe, that this was not pity but respect. There were no words of grand comfort, no promises of rescue. Just a moment of silent companionship in a world that had grown far too loud with indifference. The man didn't wait for her to thank him. He didn't look around to see if anyone had noticed. In fact, he almost hoped they hadn't. He wasn't helping to be seen. He was helping because that's just who he was. This act wasn't about the old woman alone. It was a reflection of how he lived his life, quietly giving, quietly enduring. He didn't hold grudges against a world that gave him little. He didn't see himself as less than others just because his job was humble. What he lacked in possessions, he made up for in dignity. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, but quietly transforms every space it touches. And though the moment passed quickly, just a few minutes in the rain, a few kind gestures exchanged between two souls, it left behind something weightier than time. It left behind proof that character doesn't need a spotlight. It shines on its own. He turned to leave, unaware that life had seen him, even if no one else had, unaware that the woman he helped wasn't just anyone, and that soon this single act would echo far beyond the wet street where it began. Summoned to the CEO's office. Some moments arrive without warning. No drum roll, no sign from the skies, just a quiet shift in the air, like a tide turning far out at sea. For the cleaner, the morning after the rain felt like any other. His clothes were still damp from the night before. His breakfast, a half-dry piece of roti. His reflection in the bus window, tired and unchanged. Nothing about the day suggested that something extraordinary was waiting for him. He clocked in, picked up his broom, and began his usual rounds. The building's polished floors reflected everything but him. Office workers moved briskly past him with their phones in hand and urgency in their steps. It was a place of hierarchy, sharp suits, glass doors, and silent elevators. People like him didn't belong in conversations, only in corners. Then something unusual happened. A security guard approached him, not with impatience, not with a complaint, but with a message. The CEO wants to see you, now. At first, he thought it was a mistake. People like him don't get summoned to the top floor. The CEO's office was a world apart, air-conditioned, silent, full of leather chairs and controlled power. He hesitated, wondering if he had done something wrong. Had someone complained? Had he accidentally broken a rule? With cautious steps and uncertain breath, he was led through doors that never opened for people in his uniform. He walked through silent hallways where his footsteps suddenly felt too loud. Inside the lift, he avoided eye contact with executives who wondered what someone like him was doing there. The CEO's assistant greeted him with a strange gentleness. No coldness, no rush, just a nod, and then, "Go ahead, she's waiting for you." She? He didn't understand, until the door opened. There she was, the old woman from the night before. Dry now, dressed in elegance that only wealth could afford. Her presence filled the room, not with authority but with something more powerful, grace. She looked at him not like a CEO's mother looking at a cleaner, but like a human being who had been seen and remembered. Her smile was not one of pity, it was one of deep recognition. "You didn't know who I was," she said softly. "But you treated me like someone who mattered. That's rare." He stood frozen, overwhelmed, confused, humbled. She turned to her son, the CEO seated beside her. "This man didn't walk past me like the rest. He didn't offer help for show. He gave what little he had with more dignity than most people give millions." The CEO looked up, studied him silently for a moment, and then stood. "You gave my mother kindness. Kindness rewarded. A life changed." He entered the building as a cleaner and left as something more, not because he asked, but because he acted when no one else did. That simple moment in the rain, born from quiet compassion, rippled into something far greater. The CEO offered him a permanent position, better pay, and above all, respect. The one thing he'd never been given freely. But beyond the promotion, what truly changed was how he was seen. People who once brushed past him now greeted him. The same halls that had ignored his presence now acknowledged his worth, not because of power or money, but because of a heart that chose kindness over convenience. He never sought reward, he didn't even expect thanks, but life has a way of noticing the unnoticed, of lifting those who lift others, proving that, in a world of noise, quiet goodness still echoes the loudest.